All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or good morning if you're out on the West Coast. My name is Phil Schuman. I'm the Director of Financial Literacy for Indiana University, and I'm also the co-chair and co-founder of the Higher Education Financial Wellness Summit, which, not coincidentally, I have put up the information about this year's summit that's going to be held in beautiful Bloomington, Indiana, where it won't be 11 degrees this July. So if you're interested, come out July 14th through 16th here at IU. We would love to have you. We'll tell you a little bit more about the summit as we've got going on. This year, we're doing the Student Experience, which is a one-day-long intensive session for students who have applied to be a part of the program where they can learn about bringing financial wellness to their campus. We are going to have a second round of applications opening up here in the next few days. So if you know of any student that's interested on your campus of bringing financial wellness or helping bring financial wellness to your campus, have them sign up, go through the application process. It will be a fantastic time, I can assure you. We did announce on Monday that our first keynote speaker is going to be Zach Taylor, who's a research assistant from the University of Texas at Austin. We're also noticing that a lot of other organizations are picking up on Zach's work, and we're falling right in line with that too. Zach's work has been about the simplification of language in the financial wellness world, in the financial aid world. And we really wanted to come in and talk to us just kind of about what he's seen and how he thinks we can be better communicators to our students to help them with their financial situations. We will have 3 other keynote announcements coming up. We will have another one here in a couple weeks, another one a couple weeks after that, and the 4th one a couple weeks after that. So please stay tuned to those announcements because we do have a great lineup of speakers that will be coming this year. In addition to that, the call for proposals, it opened up a couple weeks ago, so if you have a great idea of what you want to talk about at the summit, please submit that as soon as you can. Our registration opened up on Monday earlier this week, so the early bird registration is open. You can just kind of see our little timeline there. So the call for proposals will close down on March 15th. The notifications for those that sent out or sent call for proposals to us, they'll be notified by April 5th. The early bird deadline for registration is the end of March as well, and then we'll go on to regular, whatever you want to say. Bottom line is it's $200. It's a cheap conference to come to. You get a lot of stuff out of that. It should be a really good time. We would love to have you here. And again, we don't know what the weather's going to hold because yesterday it was -8, and on Sunday of this week it's supposed to be 60. So in 5 days we have a 50-degree swing, 60-degree swing actually. I can do math. So it should be a great time, and we have no idea what to expect. But if you want more information, or if you just want to register, please go to www.hefwa2019.org. I should also note that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted just on www.hefwa.org probably tomorrow. But with that, I want to turn it over to Jimena Huaco, who's going to kind of be our moderator for the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil. Hi, everybody. My name is Jimena Huaco. I probably have met a lot of you at a previous summit, but for those of you who don't know me, I help with the HEFWA advisory group, and I also am the assistant director at the Career Collaborative at Champlain College in beautiful Burlington, Vermont. And today is a nice, cold and sunny day here in Burlington. And I want to welcome you all, and I'm going to introduce our presenter for today. But before that, I just want to go over a couple of logistical things. So first thing, for those of you who are not familiar with Zoom, you do have a chat room that you have access to as participants. So anybody during the presentation, I please encourage you to submit any questions to the chat room. You could send them to everybody so that everybody can see your questions, or you can send them directly to me. I will gather all the questions, and then at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. If there's any questions that go unanswered at the end, we will definitely follow up with those answers. And as Phil mentioned, we will have the recording and the slides available for you all after the webinar. So please feel free to just send your questions through the group chat. If there's anything that comes up, whether it's logistical, technical, also please just feel free to send me a message, and we will just have our presenter through the webinar just go through her slides, and then at the end we'll wrap up with some questions. Um, I think that's it as far as logistical things. So I am now going to introduce our presenter, Dr. Emily Schwartz. She's a former teacher and college professor who now runs the MoneyMoments financial education program on the Arizona State University campus and the surrounding K through 12 schools. The program reaches over 6,000 people each year in Arizona, and in 2016, the American Bankers Association recognized it as one of the top financial education programs in the country. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Emily.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and get my PowerPoint up here. There we go. Okay, wonderful. So yes, today we are talking about budgeting and specifically the issues that come up when we talk to students about how to manage their money. Because as I think we all can agree, a lot of students know the steps to do, or at least it's easy to tell the students, yes, just come up with a plan, look at what your expenses are likely to be, and look at your money coming in, your money coming out, and try to make those as equal as possible. I mean, all of those things sound very, very logical. But as we all know, it's not that simple. There's a lot of emotions that come into it. I don't know terribly many college students, let alone just people in general, that say, gosh, I'm just going to go spend money today. And I'm thinking very logically and rationally. And after weighing the pros and cons, I feel it's a good idea. No, money is very emotional. And so we need to really understand the emotions and motivations behind students' financial decisions if we're going to help steer those behaviors into new money habits. So I'd like to begin by reminding everybody that money is more about the mind than the math. Because there's numbers, we tend to think of money as a math thing. And that's not true. I mean, I've never met the person who said, gosh, I would be so good at budgeting if I just was better at subtraction. That's not a thing, and we do it in high schools too. We put personal finance classes, if they are lucky to have one, in a math department. And that's not really its appropriate place, in my opinion. I think it needs to at least start out as a psychology class to understand our relationship with finances and our motivation behind our different financial choices. So I'd like to put a pin in that for a second. And I would like you to think for a moment about some of the specific problems or concerns or issues that you encounter with money when it comes to students. And you don't need to share in the chat box, but I would like you to come up with at least one problem that you see and write it down wherever you are, because we are going to come back to that problem later in the webinar. So like I said, you don't necessarily need to share that in the chat box, but just I'd like you to think, what's a common thing that you come up with? Is it that the students, can't find time to work, or they take on too many loans, or they've never been taught how to budget, or whatever your particular pet peeve is, so to say, that you find you encounter at your university. So I'd like you to write that down somewhere so that you can reference it later. EverFi and the Higher One Institute did a survey in 2014 of thousands of, actually 42,000 college students, four-year college students, and looked at their financial attitudes to see, is this a problem? Maybe this is just a manufactured problem that we say kids can't manage their money, but maybe they can. So they looked at some very specific behaviors to see, is in fact financial education or financial behavior getting worse, so to say. So these were some very specific behaviors that they saw declining. We see things like paying credit card bills on time, reviewing bills, paying off the entire credit card bill, following a budget, limited spending, saving basically any of their money. So I think we're all in agreement that there is a problem, but I'd like to talk about the why of that problem. And we can debate all day what the real reason for those problems is, but I think what's equally important is to look at why the students think it's a problem. because what the students think and the students' perception of the problem makes a huge impact on the way they then go try to solve their financial issues. So for that discussion, we will be using the attribution theory of motivation. You might know this by a similar name if you've heard the concept of growth mindset, right? Where, if students think that they attribute their successes to effort, then they are encouraged to keep going. But if it was just ability, then telling kids, don't tell kids good job, but say, wow, you really tried hard, this whole growth mindset thing. Attribution theory is very similar to that. Attribution theory is the interpretive process by which people assign causes to their behavior. So what does that mean? That means that all of us act as little scientists in our lives. When something happens to us or when something happens in our life, we immediately start looking for the reason why that happened. I got in a car accident today. Okay, so why did that happen to me, right? Or if someone says, I slipped and fell when I walked out of my door, why did that happen to me? Or I had a really good day. Why did that happen to me? We're constantly looking for the reason. In the attribution theory, there are basically 4 categories of reasons. And to explain those 4 categories, I'm going to use the metaphor of baseball, just to keep it really easy. So attributions, or the reasons why things happen according to us, can be categorized 2 ways. We can say it's either an internal or an external reason. So either something that we did internally or something that was done externally to us. Or they can also further be categorized as something that is unchangeable, circumstances that cannot be changed, or circumstances that can be changed. So using the baseball metaphor, let's just look at this. Let's pretend you're in a big game and you didn't hit the home run that you needed to hit, and you're searching for a reason why that didn't happen. Well, if you decide it's both an internal and unchangeable reason, you would say, well, I didn't hit that home run because of my ability. We classify ability as internal and unchangeable. So I'm just not very good at baseball. I'm not good at baseball. It's unchangeable. It's an internal thing. And that's why I didn't hit the home run. You could say it's unchangeable, but also that it was external. So you might instead say, no, you know what? The other team was just really good. You can't change that fact. And it's external to me. The other team was just really good. That's why I didn't hit the home run. You could have an internal changeable reason, which is effort. I didn't train hard enough. I didn't practice hard enough. That's why I didn't hit the home run. Or you might actually say, you know what? It was just luck. That's something external, changeable. Who knows if my luck will be different tomorrow? It wasn't today, could be different tomorrow. Anything can happen, external and changeable. So these are the 4 categories that people use in attribution theory. As educators, which we all are working in higher education, no matter what our job description is, we really want students to be in this internal, changeable attribution zone. We want them to think that it was effort that caused either the good thing or bad thing that happened to them, because it's something they have control over. It's something that's internal to them and is changeable. They can work on it. They can make it get better. So how do we get them there? We can't just tell students, oh, no, you know what? If you are really bad at money, just try harder, because if they're not in that green quadrant yet, they're not going to think change is possible. So we need to move them into that quadrant, and it's not always easy to do that. Before they can move into that quadrant, that effort quadrant, we need to find out what emotions are playing into their money decisions and attributions so that we know how to kind of shift their behaviors. So I want you to think, let's put a pin in attribution theory for a second. Let's kind of back up even more global with money and emotion. I want you to think of some of the specific emotions you have seen, maybe, or maybe you've felt, maybe these are emotions you've felt about money personally, or you've seen your friends or your students or your colleagues feel about money. And I'm betting that they fall into some of these categories. One of the biggest surface level things we see with money is jealousy. And I say surface level because jealousy isn't often the root emotion, so to say, but it's definitely what we see on the surface. It comes across as jealousy. We see people that are happy about money. I mean, this doesn't have to be negative, right? People can be very happy about money. They can also feel ashamed. So now we're kind of diving deeper into the spiral of emotions, so to say. And they can also be afraid. And if we were to kind of go from surface level to deep, I would say that fear does tend to be at the core of, you know, the deeper emotions that people feel about money. It doesn't always look like fear on the surface, but that is often the core emotion that drives whatever those surface level emotions are. So let's kind of dig into each of these categories of emotions and see how they impact our money behaviors. Jealousy is the first one. And I love this because sometimes we take this phrase, right? We say more money doesn't make you happier, right? Well, that's, you know, we all know that's crazy because of course money can make you happier. Have you ever got some money? Doesn't it make you happier? Right? You know, we know that money can make you happier, but it's only in very specific circumstances, which I think is interesting. More money means you are happier if it makes you richer than your friends. So that means if you are, you know, if you're making $35,000 a year and your friends all make, you know, 45, that 35 seems very small. But if you're making 35 and your friends all make 25, that makes you feel really rich. Same buying power, same everything, but it's just the comparison, where you are in the comparison of your friends. So that's kind of interesting. Also, that kind of comparison can lead to emotional spending. So emotional spending is using money you have not earned to buy things you don't need, to impress people you don't even like. And I think we've all been there before, or at least know someone who has, or can appreciate this notion of what jealousy can do to us in terms of emotional spending. Then let's look at happiness, because again, I feel that money gets a very negative rap sometimes. Money can make us happy. Money makes us feel very powerful. But it's really important to recognize why money makes us feel powerful. Let's think of the implications of that. If money makes you feel powerful and you put that happiness in the money itself, well, when the money goes away, then unfortunately, so does the happiness. So instead, where we'd really like to kind of be in terms of happiness and money is instead putting that happiness in whatever action got us the money in the first place. So if you get a raise at work, or you get a great job, or you get some kind of promotion or whatever, anything that gets you more money, you got a scholarship, put your happiness in the, I worked really hard to get that promotion. I worked really hard to get that scholarship. So that if that's where the happiness is, well, if the money goes away, yeah, it went away, but the thing that got you there is still internal to you. So if that's where we put the money, the happiness, then it's much more internal to us and can't be taken away as easily. Now we're looking at shame. Remember, people tend to feel ashamed when they think others are judging their money habits. And I know we've all been there. I know we have all been there and realized that, it's not, we're not judging you, students. Like we try to tell people all the time, no, really, we're not judging you. Please just help me, just help me help you, right? But students don't always think about it like that. If they get even the hint that we're judging their behaviors, the wall goes up and they don't want to talk. And this is evidence, and we all do this. I mean, my gosh, I did this the other day and it was so obvious to me what was happening. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where your credit card gets declined. So this happened to me the other day. and at Panda Express of all places. And I'm standing there trying to order my orange chicken that I could eat a gallon of if challenged. And my credit card was declined. And there was a line of people behind me. And I did what we all do in that scenario. I instantly just like verbal vomited to this poor 18-year-old cashier about all the possible reasons that my credit card could have been declined. Oh, maybe the bank just put a fraud alert on it because I was spending more money than I normally do, because normally I'm very fiscally responsible. And I was going on and on and on. And I looked up and I realized the cashier didn't care. The cashier had no inkling of feeling on her face at all. She was just like, well, I don't care. Why are you telling this to me? And as I was driving home, I realized, oh, no, I was ashamed. I was afraid that she and the other people in the line were going to think I couldn't afford my lunch. And that's what I was embarrassed about. And it really was kind of an eye-opening experience to me, because I realized that we think other people care about our money situation so much more than they really, really do. So finding these reasons, that tapping into why we think we're ashamed of things, kind of helps us realize that maybe those aren't terribly valid reasons and people aren't judging us as much as maybe we think they are. Next, we have fear. So fear, that's a pretty obvious one, right? We feel afraid when we think money has gotten out of our control. As long as we are in control, then we feel fine. But there's a lot of things that are, exhibit the truth that maybe we don't have control, okay? 46% of Americans can't cover an unexpected $400 expense. And think about the implications of that, right? If your car breaking down could completely throw off your entire financial life, then you are not in control of your money, the car is. Right? The car breaking or not breaking would be in control of your entire financial situation. And it doesn't even have to be that dire. It can be something as small as $400. Average household credit card debt is almost $6,000. The class of 2016 averaged almost $40,000 in student loan debt. I mean, these are big numbers, folks. These are scary numbers. So it's no wonder that people are afraid. It's no wonder that people are afraid. So what can we do about it? All right. Here is the part that we can start to connect these pieces. So we've talked about attribution theory and how people can, think things are internal to them or external to them. We've talked about various different emotions that people feel about money. So now let's connect these two things. So let's look at jealousy. Let's look at jealousy for a second. If somebody feels jealous and they attribute that to being something internal, that feeling is going to manifest itself as guilt, right? So it would be like you looking at something that a friend has and going, oh man, I wish I'd tried harder in life. I wish I'd taken a different path in life and then I could have had those things. It's guilt. It's a very internal attribution. But someone could also feel jealousy. And instead of saying, oh, I could have tried harder, they could be angry. How dare that friend have something that I don't have? It's an external thing to themselves. Happiness is the same way. So if you're happy about money and you think that's an internal thing, you're proud. That manifests itself as pride. You're saying, gosh, this is fabulous that this thing happened to me and I'm so proud of how I've budgeted and I've worked really hard. But happiness can also manifest itself as gratitude. External. Gosh, I am so glad that I was blessed with a lot of money and I'm so thankful that I have these things because I had nothing to do with it. It's more external. So those are two perspectives there. Shame, pretty much both times only manifests itself as internal. That's pretty much how shame is. It's an internal thing. And fear can be either one. If it's internal, it's more of a depression. I'm in this situation because I could have done more and I'm depressed about it. But it can also manifest itself as anger, right? So I'm really angry at this thing and I'm scared of this thing that I have no control over, and that's where anger comes in. So I really want you to look at these circles here, because if we think about it, if a student is feeling angry, there's not a lot we can do until we move past that anger. Because if a student is angry, that's a very external attribution. That is a deep-seated emotion, and it's an external attribution. So as long as they are speaking the language of anger, it's going to be very hard to convince a student that there's anything they can do about it. Guilt, shame, pride, those are, guilt and shame, those aren't positive emotions, but they are emotions we can work with. So please don't interpret this as, yes, we should make students feel guilty because we can work with that. No, but what I'm pointing out is that is an emotion that we can use to help move them towards better money habits. So I'd like to pause here for a second. Because I do recognize that there's a lot of different factors that can go into a student's financial issues, and some of them are not in their control, right? So we need to kind of back up and let's look at ourselves for a minute, because it makes us more relatable. If we can find something to relate to with a student in terms of money, it makes the conversation so much easier. It becomes way less ivory tower, us versus them, us telling them how to be. We want to find that relatable moment. So I encourage you to all, maybe you could do this activity with your students, or maybe you could just kind of do it individually right now, but you fill in these blanks, right? So I feel, and then pick an emotion, right? Jealous, happy, ashamed, fearful, maybe pick your own, about money when I, and then give, a common situation that happens. And then I can stop that emotion from negatively affecting my financial health by doing this or reminding myself that, or et cetera, et cetera. So, I kind of already did one. It was a silly example of having my credit card declined, right? So I said, I feel shameful about money when my credit card is declined, as an example. And, I can stop that emotion from negatively affecting my financial health by reminding myself that people don't care nearly as much about your finances as they think you do. So that was a silly example. I could use a bigger one, which maybe some of you can relate to. I feel fearful about money when I think about paying for college for my 2 young kids. I'll be honest, I have a 4.5 and a 2.5-year-old at home. And right now I'm just thinking, well, they better be smart. I don't know how else they're going to go to school. Like, this school's expensive, and it really causes me a lot of fear. And so, I can stop that emotion from negatively affecting my financial health by educating myself on college saving options. I think it's easy when we're afraid to stick our head in the sand and just say, well, I don't know, I'll figure it out later. But if we, hit it head on and tackle, all right, well, so let me take an afternoon and try to figure out what my college saving options are. That information, that education alleviates fear, because education breeds power where fear does not. So anyway, I hope you will do this activity either by yourself or as a group, because it really is a positive mechanism to find where the relatable moments and emotions are. Which brings us to something I call the stigma effect. Okay, so what I would like you to do right now, let's look back at that question, or that money problem that I had you think of earlier. All right, remember in the very beginning of the webinar, I asked you to write down a common problem that you see with students. And I'd like you to think about whether that problem is something that is controllable or something that's uncontrollable. So is this something that the students totally have control over, or is it something that the students do not have control over? And so Phil, I think this is where we could do that poll. Yeah, great. Okay, so if you could just click one of those boxes, and you can just check, yes, the problem is something that's within the student's controllable, or this problem that I see is something that is not controllable. It's outside the student's control, and then click submit. And I will give you a quick second to do that. And then we will see how those break down. Are we getting some responses, Jimena?
I guess I'm the only one that can see
Oh,
it.
sorry.
You're fine. I guess I'm the only one saying I'm watching this. So currently we've had 28 people vote, actually 29 people vote. 25 out of the 29 say controllable, 4 out of the 29 say uncontrollable.
Okay, thank you, Phil. All right, so 25 of you said that, yeah, this problem is something within the student's control, and 4 of you said that it's outside of the student's control. So let's look at the implications of that. All right, and this might become a slightly uncomfortable conversation, but I think we need to have the uncomfortable conversations before we can get better. All right, so there was this really awesome article in the Journal of Social Psychology in '98, I believe, Menick and Perry, and they did all this really interesting research on stigma and how it affects us being sympathetic or unsympathetic to someone's situation. So here's how I best describe it. If I told you that I had to end this webinar early because I needed to rush to the hospital to visit my sister who was just diagnosed with breast cancer, every single one of you would feel sympathy for me. You would go, oh my gosh, that is terrible. Oh, I'm so sorry. That's a horrible situation. Like, there would be a lot of sympathy thrown my way. If instead I said, oh my gosh, I need to end this webinar early. I need to go visit my sister in the hospital. She was trying to like tightrope walk across a 10-story building and blindfolded and fell and broke all her limbs. You'd probably be like, well, maybe she won't do that again. That was probably a dumb call, right? Like, that was, now, same thing. All of the resulting situation is the same, but the cause is different. If it was breast cancer, that's something that's not in her control. It's external to her, and you're going to feel a lot of sympathy. If it's something that was in her control, we as people just naturally are going to feel like, okay, well, I'm not going to give you as much sympathy there because you kind of did this to yourself. So let's think about that. And then let's think about the implications of what we just realized in this poll that Phil sent out. We said, the vast majority of you said that the thing that you see, the money problem that you see most often, is within the student's control. So we have to be very aware of our potential own bias as people, that we are programmed to feel less sympathy or less likely to help somebody or less motivated to help somebody when we think that the money problem or the problem that they're having is something they have control over. Now, obviously, we would not be in this profession if we weren't able to work through any potential perceived bias, right? Like, we're there to help all students. That's our job. But I think it's really important to point out that potential for bias is there. And so here's students that we see their problem as being something they can control. They see the problem as something that they can't control. And we have a predisposition to not show as much sympathy because of that disparity. So it's an interesting thing to think through. And especially, like, even if we are able to overcome that, of course, we're going to help all students. Think about the implications for that student, because not everybody in their life is as good of a person as you are, right? Their friends, their peers, their colleagues, they might not care. They might not give them any sympathy at all or any help at all, because they just think, whatever, you did this to yourself. And as long as that perception's there, it's going to be very difficult for that student to get help. There we go. So what do we do about it? Well, there's 4 things we can do. When you are meeting with a student, the very first thing we need to do is determine what emotions, identify the emotions that are leading to their behaviors. Through your conversations with them, identify what emotions are leading to these behaviors, to these financial problems. Then we're searching for the student's perception of control. Do they think that whatever financial issue they're having is something that they can have control over or not? It's important that you understand where they're coming from. Next, we want to look at what the reality of that control is. Is their perception real? Well, I mean, of course their perception's real, but is there more to that story? Is the reality of that control the same as what the student is perceiving, right? Or is there a disparity there? Finally, we need to help them focus on what is in fact changeable. Look, we all know that there are some very systemic problems in poverty that keep students in poverty that they have no control over, that keep higher education inaccessible to students that they have no control over. And that's just the reality of it. That's the fact of it. But how can we find what is changeable and focus on that? Because that's where we can have at least a little bit of influence in our short time with the students. What can we change, and how can I help you change it and show you that it is possible to change? So I have a few steps that I'm going to get into. Another really cool activity, and you are welcome to copy the slide and do it with your staff or with your students. I call it the Seeing All Sides activity. We're not going to take the time to really delve into it right now. But it's a really good exercise in that, you look at a hypothetical student and then you try to think, all right, let me try to see a internal and external reason that this might be true. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a student that comes from a very wealthy background and saves a lot of money. One way to look at that student might be, wow, so that student is such a great saver and they try really hard and they save a lot of their money, right? But you don't know the story. Another side of that might be, yeah, this student comes from a wealthy background and saves a lot of money because their parents literally do it for them. They have nothing to do with it. It's not them. Their parents are doing this. And if their parents were to stop, that money would be gone. Another thing, you've got a student who has paid their bills late for the past 6 months. Well, we could say that student's completely irresponsible and, just can't seem to pay bills on time, and that's their problem. They need to have better time management skills, et cetera, et cetera. Other side of that could be, maybe this family suffered a terrible tragedy and this student has now become the primary caregiver for a younger sibling or an elderly parent or grandparent. We don't know. There's two sides to everything. I think we end up being kinder people when we start by giving the benefit of the doubt until proven otherwise. So just these are a couple other scenarios you can definitely use, or you can create your own, but it's a really thoughtful point of discussion with either a staff or a student group. So how do we show students that they are in control? So this is where it gets tricky, right? Because it's not even just students. I mean, this is anybody. You can't just go up to someone and say, no, you're actually in control of this situation. Oh, great, really, I am? Oh, that's amazing. That's not how it works. We need to show them where the control can happen. So there's a couple different ways that we can do this. I think the number one thing really is taking baby steps. Sometimes we forget that when we talk about financial literacy, when we talk about financial education, we think it's very just mundane because that's the profession that we're in, but it sounds very scary and just insurmountable if you're a student who's never done it. If you've been told you're bad at money and your family's bad at money your whole life, it's very self-fulfilling, or can be, and it can be very negative to overcome. So the thing I always like to do with people is, I love to say, hey, do you consider yourself to be an athlete? And since I hang out with a lot of higher ed type folks, we all seem to be the same. And they go, no, of course I wouldn't consider myself to be an athlete. Are you crazy? And then I say, okay, me neither, right? But then I say, are you physically capable, though, of doing 10 jumping jacks? And most people say, well, yeah, I mean, of course, I can do 10 jumping jacks, but that's not what you asked me. So we got to remember that the same is true for financial education. We're not asking people to be money athletes overnight. We're just asking them to do 10 jumping jacks, right? And you can decide what those are. Maybe the 10 jumping jacks are, hey, could you save $10 next week? Could you, rent your textbooks instead of buying them? Could you, fill out 3 job applications that might help you get a student worker job on campus next semester? tiny things, little things, and give them that and then have them go do it. Because most people can complete small baby steps. And then when we clearly define what those baby steps are, they're more motivated to take the next baby step, take the next baby step, take the next baby step. I use the job situation because that's such a common one. We tell students, well, just go get a part-time job. Nobody's born knowing how to do that. If they've never applied for a student worker job or any kind of part-time job, that can seem really, really hard. Hey, you know what? Here's an example of my resume. Make this for you. Come back to me. Find 3 jobs that might be interested in you. Make a login to the university job portal, like whatever your particular situation is. Define what the baby step is, and then go let them do that and report back to you. Observing and tracking is another really important thing. So kind of to continue with the baseball metaphor, I always ask people, hey, how exciting do you think a baseball game would be if you didn't keep score? And people look at me like, are you crazy? Yeah, no, a basketball game, a football game, a baseball game is not going to be exciting if you don't keep score. And it's the same in your financial life. If you're not tracking your spending and making sure it's, here's my priorities, here's my spending, I'm making sure they match, there's no way that anybody's going to ever know if they're successful or not. It's adding that element of intentionality to their spending. Even something as simple as, gosh, you have those students that have full scholarships. Sometimes those students have no idea how much their scholarship is because, I don't know, it's covering all of tuition. They should know, right? They should know the benefit that scholarship is providing them, so that if they were to mess up and, academically and need an extra semester, they need to know the value of that thing that was given to them. And observing and tracking can be really powerful in that regard. Investigating priorities can be another really big thing. I like to put students in a position of control, right? So let them tell us what's important to them. And as students become older and as students become adults, they can make their own priorities. And I tell people, look, don't let anybody tell you what's important to you. The only time it's a problem is when you're saying that XYZ is important to you, but you're spending money on ABC, right? If you say that XYZ is important to you, then that's where the money should be going. But we encounter this problem all the time, right? We say one thing's important, but we spend money on the other thing. Helping students both see that and then also figure out how to change that can be a really positive dialogue. Remember, all of this, we're coaches, right? We're not money, teachers. It's not like we're just teaching them this stuff. We have to facilitate and coach their own learning, or else it's not going to happen. And I think we all know that as financial education professionals. It's just, how do we do it? As coaches, we have to define the problem. Helping a student see what the problem is can be super, super important. I mean, a good coach doesn't just say, hit the ball harder, I don't know, like make the ball go further. No, they say, gosh, if you turn the bat a little bit this way, or why don't you work on a different kind of swing, or this, a good coach helps define the problem. Defining exactly what the problem is can make solution finding a lot easier. Sometimes students know they're having money troubles, but they don't know where or how or why, and helping them define what the problem is often makes the solution something they might even know how to fix on their own. They just need you to help point out the problem. Sometimes the problem sits with the big things, not the small things, right? So such a common refrain in financial education these days is, just cut out your, going out to eat, just stop going out to eat, and just, stop going out for coffee, and you're going to have saved so much money. And that kind of drives me insane, actually, because, I've never talked to a super rich person and been like, oh, how'd you become a millionaire? And, oh, well, it was when I stopped drinking Frappuccinos. Like, that's not how life works. It's not those little things. Help a student look at what big things can they change. So I'll give you an example from an adult perspective, right? What's the biggest chunk that we spend money on? Most of the time it's housing. So we spend anywhere on average from 20 to 35% of our income on where we live. All right. So possibly cutting one big thing, can we adjust our living situation, that big thing, instead of trying to meticulously cut a million little things? I always tell students, live with as many other human beings as you possibly can for as long as you can humanly stand it. Because you've been through this. Once you live alone, it's hard to go back with living with other people, but it is so much more expensive to live by yourself. So those are just some examples. How can you cut big things, make big systemic changes? And often students report, and I'm sure you found this in your own life, sometimes it's easier to cut one big thing. You notice less of an impact on your life to cut one big thing than a million little things. So it's an option. Might not work for everybody, but it's something to consider, something to reframe. Also, being a good predictor. I think it's easy to manage our money when things are going well, but we need to also be good at managing our money when things do not go well. And that involves being a good predictor. So, everybody says, oh, you're supposed to have an emergency fund. You're supposed to have an emergency fund. Well, one, that's not always practical for college students. And two, a lot of them don't even know what emergencies they're preparing for. I mean, my favorite question, I do a lot of speaking to college students and high school students. And one of my favorite questions to ask them is, what do you think an emergency fund is for? And my favorite answer I've ever gotten for that question, they say things like, well, I don't know, like maybe a tornado. Like that's the worst, a tornado, from someone living in Southern California, by the way. This was in California that I asked this question, and it was hilarious because that's clearly not a concern of theirs. But that's not a concern, right? But we don't know as 19-year-olds how much a water heater costs, how much an emergency plane ticket home is going to cost, how much it costs to get sick, what a healthcare deductible is. A lot of people have no idea. So helping students see what can go wrong so that they can prepare for that can be a really huge thing. Even if it's something as simple as helping your seniors or people who are preparing to move off campus, all right, so what do you need to move in? You're probably going to need first month's rent and a security deposit. Let's talk about what that looks like and how we can be saving for it. Finally, it's really important to remember that the things that combat fear, is knowledge and a plan, right? So fear is a very external, scary thing that we have nothing that we can control over, but knowledge and a plan give us that control back. You would never go into a game and say, I don't know, let's just figure it out. We'll just kind of tackle stuff as it comes. No, we study things. We study the other team. We study the game plan. We really try to make a plan for it and then, move on from there. So if there's a thing that a student doesn't know about, help them research it, right? Help them become empowered to go find that knowledge, even if it's something that you can't directly give them. I feel like the financial industry has a lot of mystery shrouded around it, right? Like you have to be this really smart person to be good at managing your money. And I just don't know where that comes from, because a lot of it is so not difficult. And a lot of these financial concepts are very approachable. They just have this feel that they should be very difficult. And it's just not necessarily the case. So some wrap-ups to kind of take away. Remember, when you're speaking with a student, we got to check our frustrations at the door. I know this is probably the 10th time you've talked to this student about this problem, and you're like, oh, if you just did the things I told you, you wouldn't be here. But, check that frustration at the door. Relate wherever possible. Even if you've never been in this situation with this student before, or in your life that this student's having, even if you've never been in the same situation, find something that's relatable. Find a time you've been afraid about money, a time you've been scared, a time you've been ashamed, and relate to that student when all possible. Remember, find where they are first before asking them to change. If you don't know the starting point, it's really hard to get to the ending point. And think about it. You pull up Google Maps and ask, how to get to the nearest hospital. It has to know where you're starting, right? Google Maps is not going to give you turn-by-turn directions from any possible starting point. They have to know where you're starting. And it's the same with money coaching. We have to know where they're starting before we can ask them to change. And remember, folks, change is hard, all right? Change is very difficult. When you hear a student who is angry, remember that that is a way of saying, I'm afraid. If you interpret all anger as fear, anytime you hear someone say, I'm angry, interpret it in your head as I'm afraid. And it really helps put some defenses down so that you can have a productive conversation. I also want to share my email with you. So emily.schwartz@midfirst.com. I am based out of Arizona. MidFirst is the official bank of Arizona State University. But like I said, I mean, I have extensive experience in teaching as a K-12 teacher and also as a university professor. So I've seen a lot of these things, and I'm happy to kind of bounce some ideas around with you or help you find any kind of solutions that, that you might need. I'm the manager of financial education. That is my entire job. I have nothing to do with banking. It's all education, and I'm happy to help you work through some of those issues wherever possible. And I hope to see you in Indiana this summer because I know I'm going to be there checking it out. I've never been to Bloomington, so it's going to be really fun. Are there any questions that I can help you with right now, though, that might pertain to everybody? Jimena, I don't know how many, or Phil, how many people are still with us, but if there's any questions in the chat box, I guess I can look too. Hang on.
Thank you, Emily. That was great. I really appreciate the way that you just presented the information and broke it down and in a very digestible way. I'm definitely making notes of this, and in a way I think it resonates a lot to the topics that keep coming back up around financial literacy versus financial wealth or financial well-being, and how do we get them from just knowing what they need to do to actually changing the behavior. And the more we learn, the more we recognize that it's definitely a complex topic. There were a couple of questions that you did address as you went through your presentation, but there's a couple more that if we have time I'll just ask you. One is just regarding your kind of like the scope of your work. Does the majority of your work basically around counseling, coaching, one-on-one sessions, or do you see this applicable to more workshop style sessions?
I think it's kind of both. So I'll be honest, in my job, I do mostly workshop style. Just because, I'm at Arizona State University, which is huge. I'm a huge university. And so most of my things are workshop style to hit a lot of as many people as possible. But, I think these things are applicable in a workshop as well, because you can start with the emotional piece for a larger audience. I think it's just when you do a workshop, don't start right out at the gate with, all right, so everybody, here's the budget. We're going to pass out this budget and we're all going to fill it out together. And now we're going to go on the FAFSA website and look at all these different things. That's like the midway point. And I feel that we who do workshops kind of start at the midway point, but at the beginning, and we kind of lose all of that building up to it. So I think it's maybe including some of these, emotions and kind of self-reflecting money behaviors before you even get to the actual tools, even if it's workshop style.
Thank you. And so when you were you mentioning that we had this sort of like 4-step, very tangible, very easy to apply process of identifying the emotions with the student and then trying to get the perception of control, the reality of control, and then focus on the changeable. For the identifying the emotion process, do you see this as something that should require intervention? Like, do you think that we need to change that emotion, or should we just focus on that changeable? I mean, considering many of us may have coaching situations with students where we can see them on a recurrent basis, where they can report back or we can work with them, but kind of piggybacking to the previous question, if somebody just has like a very short period of time that they have to interact with the student,
right,
should we still be focusing on trying to get them to change that emotion association?
obviously it's going to vary. I mean, that's a great question. It's going to vary based on how much personal time you have with that student, right? If you are the coach, essentially what you're doing is facilitating a student's self-reflection. So when you're doing it one-on-one, yeah, it's easier to do that. But I still think that in a group setting, obviously it's not the perfect situation, but I do still think that in a group setting, you can start at least making students aware that that emotional self-reflection is a part of the process. So many students, I feel, don't even realize that that plays into it. And so it's just something that's never talked about. So even something as simple as kind of breaking down that barrier and saying, gosh, you know what? You all have an assignment. You need to go talk to 3 people in your life about money. Do you know what I mean? Even something like that can just kind of spur more interactions one-on-one that might, lead to a deeper conversation can really, really help, because that's one of the things that, convolutes the situation, is that money is this big emotional problem that literally nobody wants to talk about in their life. So,
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And there was a couple of last questions that came up kind of around engaging students and getting interest from them. Do you have any advice on how do you best engage either students in general to come to your sessions, or particularly there was a question around engaging low-income students?
Right. So it's really hard, isn't it? Especially, I mean, man, getting students to come to workshops, that is my whole job. And it is really hard, as I'm sure all of you can relate. I guess the thing I'll say, because we only have a few quick seconds here, the thing I've learned is, it's not by telling them all the fabulous things they're going to learn, right? Because it's not like, we know how important it is. But I think strong marketing, consistent marketing that is amusing and funny, that doesn't focus on, oh, you're going to learn how to, do all these great financial things. No, I like to partner with a group. So, when I host a workshop, I like to partner with a sorority or a fraternity or a campus group to make them be the core of that group. And then we invite other people to come too, so that if a student walks in and there's 30 other people there already, they're like, oh, this is a thing that's real and happening. Whereas if they walk into a room and they're the only one, they're like, oh, I think I might be in the wrong room, and just leave. So I feel you if you're struggling. I have the same problems, and I've tried and failed a lot of times. So, guys, I know we're headed to the end soon, so I really do encourage you. I put my email up there. It's still there. I really am interested in following up further with you later via email, and I hope you will take me up on that.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily. So yes, please feel free to reach out to Emily. Any questions that came up that might have not gotten answered, we'll make sure to follow up as well. And we'll be sending out the recording and the slides out. So just as a reminder, this is an adaptation of a presentation that we had at last year's summit. So this is just kind of like a little preview of the quality and great content that we have at the summit. So I really hope that I get to see you all in Bloomington as well in person in July this year. And watch out for our next upcoming webinar that will be happening next month, and it will be an info session around the student experience. So stay tuned, and thank you again, Emily. That was a great presentation. Thank you so much for the time, and thanks to everybody else. We hope to see you in Bloomington.